All right, let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about, my name is Rob Shums. I'm the owner of Reason Prep. I do all the videos, all the content, YouTube channel, courses, all that good stuff. Today we're going to do a study session for the SAT, the ACT, the SAT subject tests in math and chemistry and literature, college admissions, any general questions you might have, all that stuff is fair game. If you want to send me a question, you can either post it in the chat or you can send me an email, ask@reasonprep.com. And especially if you want to send me a picture of a question, that would be the way to do it. If you're interested in my courses, go to rprep.co/courses. You can see the link right below, I guess, on the screen. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. I've got some questions ahead of time. So let's go ahead and get going. The rhetorical section of the writing continues to be a tough part of the SAT for me. Besides making more errors than I'd like, I work so much slower on them, which puts me in a time crunch. Is there any way to work through these items faster, yet improve on my accuracy? So I wouldn't say faster. I mean, there's certainly more efficiently, perhaps, and there is, the type of rhetorical skills questions that you're talking about here may also impact the issue as well. Front of my pen. Here we go. So if you're talking about questions where you have to rearrange a paragraph, move a sentence around a paragraph or something, yeah, those could take potentially a long time. If you're talking about a question where you have to just make a change to the sentence or add a sentence possibly, well, no, it might be a little bit long, but make just a change to a sentence, that won't take too long. So it really depends on the question type. The main thing I would say is make sure you know the 4 principles. And for rhetorical skills questions on SAT writing, SAT writing, and ACT English, because there is quite an overlap. So know those 4 principles. I cover these in my free SAT writing and ACT English courses. So if you haven't looked at those already, do so, because I go through these 4 principles. I go through a lot of examples. That will help, because you want to know when you're doing these questions, what should you be focusing on, what is relevant, what is irrelevant. So know those. Yeah, that would be the main thing. I mean, I don't know if you've looked at this yet, but if you haven't, this is definitely a place to start. Make sure you know these 4 principles so that you can deploy them, so you know exactly what you're looking for when you have to, say, rearrange a sentence, or when you have to add a sentence to a paragraph, or whatever it might be. I don't think, for example, reading faster is going to help, or taking shortcuts in terms of like evaluating choices is going to help. It's really about familiarity, efficiency, knowing the principles, and then lots of practice to know how they're going to be applied. I would also say in general, if these questions are going to take you a long time, it might be a good idea to skip them, or at least skip the ones that you know are going to take longer than average. Skip them and come back to them later, so that you don't sacrifice your time on the test as a whole. You get everything else done and then come back to this later. Is this the 9th? Which live stream is this? This is live stream number 10. Oh, wow. Live stream 10. Okay, let's move on. For those of you who are just jumping into the live stream, if you want to ask a question, feel free to just type it in chat. Or you can send an email to ask@reasonprep.com, especially do so if you're going to send me a picture for a question, for example. If you do send me a specific question from an SAT or an ACT, please tell me the answer so I don't have to go look it up. Slows things down, makes things awkward. And if you can, provide a picture and or the source, so what test it's from, if it's from an official test, and I can try to hunt it down. So yeah, feel free to send me an email, ask@reasonprep.com, or feel free to type in chat. Next question. For an inference questions in the reading section, how do I improve on recognizing, locating exactly where the passage talks about the subject in question? So I don't think this is specific to inference questions. This is really something that applies to any reading question, for whether you're talking about the SAT or the ACT. Inference are really no different than any other questions. A lot of times we think they're going to be different, but most of the time it's really going to be a lot of what you would do for any other reading question. So obviously the first place to look is if there's a line reference. If there's a line reference, they tell you, in line 62 to 72 or in the fourth paragraph, stick really close to that line reference because almost always the answer is in those lines or maybe a little bit around them for context. So line references is where you start. The second thing, if there's no line references, is to use a keyword or keywords. Keywords are words or phrases in the questions that you can look for in the passage, skim for, and find. And once you find those really specific, conspicuous words, most likely the answer to the question is somewhere where you found those words. So looking for keywords, very useful. Third thing would be structure of the passage. So if it's a fiction passage, it has a general plot, you might be able to determine, okay, where would this fit into the plot? And so should I be looking towards the beginning, middle, or end of the passage? If it's a passage about science, a scientific experiment, and it's something about how the experiment was set up, well, then you're probably looking towards the beginning of the passage or towards the beginning of the section when they talk about the experiment, right? So it's about structure, knowing what happens when, and using that as a guide to find where the answer might be. And then the fourth thing is, if you're getting bogged down, skip and return. Right? Maybe as you answer other questions, you'll be able to find evidence that helps you answer the question you're looking for. I would also say maybe another little piece here for the SAT is those two-part questions where you have to find the lines that support the answer you gave to the previous question. That's kind of like a line reference in the sense that you can use those to help you narrow down where the answer might be. And I talk a lot about this in my reading course for both the SAT and the ACT. I go into a lot more detail about this. But these are 4/5 things that I would look for and use to help you find the answer more quickly. Because most of the time, if you're getting a question wrong, or a lot of the time, it's not because necessarily you've misread something. It's just you haven't noticed or read something that's going to be very important. Okay, do some more questions here. Is practicing Khan Academy reading specific passage type beneficial for comprehension? To some extent, I've made comments about my thoughts on Khan Academy reading elsewhere. Long story short, like any third-party test prep, even though they claim to work with the College Board, regardless of that, and that's certainly true, they're simply not going to put the time and effort and money into developing their reading materials that the College Board does for the tests. No one can, only the College Board, because that's what they do. And for that reason, the quality I found, at least, maybe it's changed recently, but from what I found, the quality of the Khan Academy reading is uneven. And therefore, this is where you get into problems, because if the quality is uneven, if the questions are not quite, or the choices are not quite good enough, they're not quite precise, they're ambiguous, and whatever it might be, then you, as a student, you'll get confused. Like if you get a question wrong, is it because you didn't understand something, an issue of comprehension, or is that the question's ambiguous? And now suddenly it's a big mess. That's why you want to stick to, as much as possible, real material. So as extra stuff, if you're completely out of new SATs, if you're completely out of other official materials, then I guess you could use it and it's fine. But really stick with real tests. And then I have a video about this. If you check my YouTube channel, just look for ran out of SATs or ran out of tests, something like that. It's in my Just Pick C series. One of the other recommendations I give is use old SAT reading, the old SAT reading passages. They're actually a little bit harder, I think, than the new stuff, especially because of the vocabulary. But it's better practice, I think, especially if you're looking for comprehension. Definitely in that case, old SAT reading, I think, is far superior to any third-party material, including Khan Academy. Oop, did that one already. Next question. I have a 22 on my ACT. I'm taking the ACT in September. It's possible to score high 20s or low 30s. Sure, it's possible. But that answer doesn't really help, right? Because, I mean, I guess what you're asking is basically, should I bother trying, right? Should I put in the time and effort? Is it a lost cause to try to get into the 30s or the 20s, high 20s? Now, I don't know enough about your specific situation to really fine tune this, but yes, it's possible. It happens for sure. So try. Definitely start studying. At the very least, even if you don't hit low 30s, if you can hit high 20s or at least, 26, 27, it's better than a 22. So it almost doesn't matter in some level whether it is possible or not. Because I can definitely say it's possible to improve, period, for sure. So either way, whether it's possible or not possible, I don't think any of us can really ever know, especially in your case, specifically for you. Like, is it possible to hit a 30 by September given your background, your scores? Yes, but no. I mean, who really knows in the end? So because we don't really know, you have to just try and see how far you can get. Definitely improving is possible. People have improved in the past from low 20s to low 30s or whatever. It's happened. So yeah, definitely try because it is possible. It's worth putting in the time. At the very least, you'll improve somewhat, and that's better than not improving at all. So for sure. Follow up on SAT reading. What are good prep books for SAT reading and how can I use them? Or should I not use them at all? Again, I wouldn't use them at all. There's no value to them whatsoever. I mean, that's too fair. That's unfair. There's some value to them, but in terms of a short-term prep process, when the goal is to get a high score in SAT reading, this also goes for ACT reading as well. I just don't. They're too often when I'm working with these books, I'll see a question where you start to wonder, wait a minute. Okay, so this is a little ambiguous. Is it ambiguous because I'm not seeing something? Or is it ambiguous because the question is just a bad question? And this is completely destructive to any kind of learning. Whereas with real tests, we know, they're not perfect, but we know they're going to be pretty darn close to fair and accurate and precise and not vague or ambiguous. And so we know on a real question, if I get it wrong or if I don't understand something, it's my fault, not the fault of the test. But whenever you're dealing with a third-party book, you never know that for sure. Maybe the book messed up. And now suddenly you're in a world where, did you mess up? Did the book mess up? Is it your fault? Is it their fault? Is it both? Like, it gets completely messed up. So I don't really recommend any prep books for SAT reading. Outside, there's some good ones out there. I think Erica Meltzer has a critical reader book, which apparently is well regarded. You can go with that. But in the end, nothing substitutes for real material. And like I said, if you've done all the new SATs and new PSATs they've released, go back to the old SATs. That is better than anything you'll find in any prep book or elsewhere. For compound nouns, how do you determine if the first noun is attributive or possessive? For example, what is the difference between superhero collection and children's collection? This is not something you'll really be tested on directly on the SAT. The question is basically like, would it be, we'll take this example, should it be children collection or children's collection? And I think in most cases, it's either clear from context. So for example, children collection sounds like a collection of children, whereas children's collection implies that it's a collection for children or related to children. So I think from context, it's often pretty clear. In other cases, it might be completely equivalent either way. So the SAT is not really going to test you on that, or the ACT, in terms of the difference between those two. As a matter of fine grammar, that's a little bit beyond what we're going to discuss here. There's probably whole pages and chapters of books on this topic, which seems to be beyond the scope of any of these tests. So if you're kind of coming at this from not the question asker, but in general, if someone's coming at this question from a English as a second language situation, then the answer to this is probably very complicated. But just in terms of an SAT, ACT answer, which is what I'm focusing on, it's not something that's really important. Just know how to use apostrophes, apostrophe S, S apostrophe when needed, and you should be good. Because either the case is going to be so obvious based on context that you would go with one or the other, or if it were ambiguous, they would never give it to you. So that's what I would go on that one. I wouldn't worry too much about this if you have a specific example from an SAT or ACT that I've missed in which this distinction is not clear, and therefore this question is much more pertinent for that particular problem. Let me know. Feel free to send it to me and I'll take a closer look. But just in general, this is not enough of an issue to worry about for the SAT and ACT, at least with any kind of consistency. What is better for SAT writing, Khan Academy or prep books? Depends on the prep book. Khan Academy is pretty good for writing because it isolates errors pretty well. Any prep book is probably fine. But actually what I would recommend most of all for prepping for SAT English, SAT writing, once you've run out, is ACT English. Because the ACT English and the SAT writing are basically the same tests. ACT English is probably a little bit harder because it's longer and there's a few more things it goes into. And I think the difficulty is just higher in general. So I would use those instead. Use ACT English tests. There's real tests available all over the place. I would use those to practice SAT writing. If you want to use Khan Academy, that's fine for extra practice, or prep books. It's probably okay. Though sometimes there you run into issues as well. They just don't. Their choices are too close. They test something not tested on the real test, and there are problems with prep books as well with even writing. So really, ACT English tests are what I would recommend for you. If you have run out of real SATs, go there because it's quality material, very close to what you'll see on the SAT. It's a good substitute. Oops. Let's do this. Whoa. Okay. I am taking the August SAT, which is about 2 months. I'm really close to getting a perfect 800 in the math section. I usually miss 2 or 3 questions because I vaguely remember or understand the concepts I deal with and run out of time to make an educated guess. How should I prepare myself in order to get a perfect score? So you've basically answered your question. I usually miss 2 or 3 questions because I vaguely remember or understand the concepts I deal with. So what's the way to get better at this is to make those concepts crystal clear, right? What questions are you having problems with? What concepts throw you off? The SAT is actually pretty limited in terms of the things it covers, especially in comparison to the ACT. The ACT is a much broader of a test than the SAT is. And I hasten to even say the SAT is deeper because more than I think about it, I really don't think it is deeper than the ACT. But in any event, it's pretty limited in terms of the topics that they test. And they also have a lot of little tiny details that come up occasionally, that little factoids, and for whatever reason they like on the SAT math test. It's good to know those too. So I would say learn those concepts. Flashcards is a great way to do it. Drilling consistently with practice, redoing questions you've missed in the past. All that stuff is really useful in terms of redoing these questions, in terms of picking up those concepts. So that's what I would say. Learn those concepts, identify those concepts, and then learn them through my courses or prep books or tutors, whatever you're doing. And that will help, because if you don't know those concepts, then no tips will help. You just need to simply learn those concepts. All right. Hey there, I took the SAT subject test, math level 1 and bio about 2 weeks ago, and I left 9 in the math and 14 in bio. Sure the rest of the math, but skeptical about 4. I'm guessing 4 in the biology. What do you think is my best estimation for my score? So it's hard to give an exact estimation. What I can do is give you kind of like an approximate ceiling. I assume you meant you omitted those questions. So I can give you an approximate ceiling, maybe like, assuming you don't get anything wrong, which we'll just assume for the purposes of this, what would be like the highest score you would probably get? I think that's the best way to approach this. And again, this is an estimation. Curves differ. Curves differ. The questions you get wrong will differ. So let's see. Oh, wait, do I not have the curves here? Okay, let me get my book so I can get the curves. Be right back. Oh, here it is. Okay. So we'll do Math 1 first. Math 1, I'm just looking in the main prep guide for subject tests, just looking at the scoring tables at the end. That's basically how I'm going to answer this question. No real magic here. Just making an educated guess. So Math level 1, let's say you left 9. You can pretty much think your ceiling is about a 720, according to this scoring rubric. Now, again, it could be different, but I would say the ceiling is probably 720. We can probably say like low 700s, assuming you get nothing else wrong. For biology, again, all estimates. For bio, if you left about 14 blank, we'll say, that would probably be about a 730. Yeah, so pretty close for both. Where, again, low 700s for both would be probably where you're at, assuming not that many wrong, and assuming the curve matches close to that kind of curve, which it probably would. It'll flatten out as it goes down. So those are probably good estimates, but you'll have to obviously wait until the test comes back to see what the actual scores would be. All right. Questions about math? For SAT math, I want to get 800, scored 740. So should I practice Khan Academy or prep books? Prep books, what is the best prep book for math? Sometimes I see the Khan Academy math is not like the real test and more complicated. Yeah, I agree with that. Again, I don't want to slam Khan Academy because it's a good resource. It's not something, it's not a bad resource at all. It's not perfect. Even though they do, in theory, work with the College Board, the questions are just simply not going to get the vetting that the College Board will put their questions through. It's just simply not going to happen. And that's no slight against Khan Academy or any prep book. Like when I make questions, the questions I make up are not going to get the vetting that the College Board will put their questions through. So you have to use them carefully. So they're good for what I like third-party Khan Academy or prep books for is targeted review. So focusing on, kind of like getting back to that previous question, focusing on concepts or topics that give you trouble, getting more review on that, getting more practice with it. That's the best thing. But I would agree, the Khan Academy math, from what I've seen, at least somewhat recently, the questions do get a little funky sometimes. They're not as, I don't know, what do you want to say, elegant or kind of straightforward. That's probably the wrong word. They're not as polished, shall we say, as something you'll see on a real SAT. So you can use Khan Academy math. What's the best prep book? Pwn the SAT math is pretty well regarded. I probably would do that. Generally, I like books by tutors. So I don't have any books myself. I sell the video courses, but generally books by tutors are, I don't know, I just like them better because tutor is in the field, working with students a lot, has their own spin on things. Whereas, a company, you get a lot of people contributing. That's got its value too. But I don't know. I just prefer books by tutors, by independent tutors. I think they're generally better, or at least more interesting. They've got a kind of a particular take on it, which you may resonate with. So Pwn the SAT math is pretty good, but otherwise any other math book is fine. Again, it doesn't really matter because we're not going to use them for full tests. Like you're not going to ever take a practice test from a third-party book and trust that score ever. That's true for math, reading, writing, science, whatever you're taking. The only scores you should ever trust are from real tests. Is the SAT's words always the same? I assume you mean like vocabulary, I'm guessing? If you mean that, then no, they differ from every test. Every test is going to have different vocab on it, whether you're looking at vocab and context questions or whether you're looking at diction questions and writing. They will always differ. So we can say no for this. I do have a vocabulary list you can check on my site. But yeah, if that didn't answer your question, if you meant something else, feel free to follow up. But no, the words do different. You're going to have different vocab on every test for sure. hey, I got a 20 on the ACT for the first time, and my goal is at least a 27, 28. Any tips? So, yeah, there's a lot of tips. There's very like whole books and my courses all cover basically what tips there might be or what strategies or approaches there might be to increase. So it's hard to give a really good answer to this because it's such a broad question. If you want to narrow it and follow up with something a bit more focused, I might be able to give a better answer. Just general things. There's no, I mean, I would say almost to kind of unanswer the question, it's not going to be about tips as much as it's going to be about consistent practice and focusing on strategy and focusing on learning concepts for the English and the math in particular, learning to deal with time management in reading and science, learning to be efficient, learning to be thorough, familiarity with the test, like all that stuff comes from practice and consistent work. So working a little bit every day to improve your score rather than trying to cram and stuff a lot of hours into single days and things like that. So yeah, it's hard to give any real useful tips because it's so broad to go from a 20 to a 28. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things you could do for each of the sections. But I would say the key is to think, okay, how can I put in the time? What can I do consistently? What should I be focusing on in each of the sections? That's going to be the ticket. It's going to be that consistent, sustained effort. Over time, you'll definitely be able to improve. And as I was saying to a previous question person, it's definitely possible to go from a 20 to a 28, but it won't really be as possible without the time and the effort commitment, which you can definitely put in and make those improvements, make those gains. In the reading passages on the ACT, should I read the passage first or the question first? Thank you. So everyone has their own different feeling on this. My particular take is you are going to read the passage first, but it's more of a skim, and it should take you no more than 2 to 3 minutes. So I do not advise, for example, underlining and annotating and marking up a passage, trying to underline or star the most important stuff, because you frankly don't know what's going to be the most important stuff until you answer questions. So spending time doing that is not great. Reading for detail and trying to remember everything to do the questions without, for example, trying to look back at the passage, I don't think is overall the most successful approach. You want to read the passage quickly, 2 to 3 minutes skim. You want to pay attention to two things. And I talk about this a lot more in the ACT Reading Bootcamp. And if you go to the link on the side of down here, you'll check out you can find more information on my ACT Reading Bootcamp. But in any event, the two things you want to focus on when you're skimming are the main idea, get a sense of what the passage is about, or in the case of a fiction passage, what's the general plot, what happens, and then get a sense of the structure. And I talked a little bit about this before in a previous answer to a question. The structure of a passage is what happens when. So if it's a fiction passage, what's the general flow of the plot from the beginning, middle to end? If it's a history passage, what does the passage talk about in the beginning and the middle and the end, right? Get a general sense of what's going on so that when you go to the questions and you need to start finding answers, you can use your knowledge of the main idea or of structure in addition to line references, keywords, all that good stuff to find the answers to the questions in the passage as efficiently and quickly as you can. So that would be my recommendation. But in the end, I mean, that's just my thing. Everyone's got their different style, and I don't think this is 100% right that you must do this, otherwise you will not do well. Ultimately, you should experiment, see what works best for you. This is what works best for me. This is what works best for a lot of my students. I have a lot of reasons why I think this works best, why it's the most efficient. But in the end, everyone is different, and you want to experiment and see what works for you. But I would say if you don't have a very solid strategy right now, start with this. Read it, 2 to 3 minutes, main idea, structure, then go to the questions and refer back to the passage as necessary. And you'll be surprised at how much you can pick up from that first skim, how much you might even remember. So you get kind of the best of both worlds in that situation. Can studying SAT 2 Math Level 1 benefit me in the SAT Math? Yeah, to an extent. There's a decent amount of overlap. I'd say SAT Math Level 1 is harder in terms of the trig stuff it gets into and some other issues. But it can help, for sure. There's good synergy between that. Same would be true to some extent, not as much, but with like SAT Math Level 2 and SAT Math. You get some synergy there. So yeah, there's definitely some good reinforcements between those two tests. I would say it's more as you put it here, the subject test in Math Level 1 helps you more with the SAT math than SAT math would help you with the subject test. I think it's very much a one-way relationship. So yeah, definitely it can help though. Where can I find SATs recently vocabulary words? So let me get a link to my site here. So you can go to reasonprep.com, or you can just type in this link into your browser. That's probably annoying. You can also just Google Reason Prep's vocab list. You'll find it. I've got a list of the vocabulary words that were on previous tests. So you can use that as a basis to start studying. I'm sure there are other resources out there, but of course this is the one that I would recommend. It's not quite updated with the most recent words. So that's something I'm going to be working on, and I'll send out an update when it is done. But you can definitely start using this and start working through the words, and you probably know a lot of them already, but it'll give you a good foundation of words to build on if vocabulary is an issue for you. Okay. What was this? Oh, I see. Okay. So the question is more of a specific math question related to absolute value equations with inequalities. And as a side note, when you have questions with absolute value and inequalities, most of the time I don't like doing them algebraically. What I like doing, this is not a problem, it's more of a concept, more like a explanation of how to tackle these algebraically. But if this were a problem, I would probably try to do this with plugging in testing values. Try not get involved in the algebra here, because as we can see, it's a little bit weird and maybe even unintuitive to try to solve this, and you have to get like two different solutions, and it gets weird. So when you can avoid it for questions like this, I recommend testing answers, plugging them in. But the basic idea here is when you have this inequality where this is going to be greater than c, where c is greater than 0, you really have two situations. And what this stems from, if you think about the easier case, let's say we had 3x plus 6, absolute value is equal to 2. Where this comes from in the case of equals is my thing in the absolute value could equal 2, and of course that would be consistent because 2 equals 2. Or the 3x plus 6 can end up being negative 2, because when it's negative 2, the absolute value turns it into positive 2, and positive 2 equals positive 2. So you have two scenarios in the case where you have that equal sign. So when you have the absolute value with an inequality, so ax plus b, for example, greater than c, you have two scenarios in the same way. One is just what you would expect, ax plus b is greater than c, right? Just like here. Here, it's the same kind of situation where this is basically going to be related to the negative c value, the opposite, right? It can be related to the negative c because negative c becomes positive. Where it gets a little bit tricky is you have to remember when you essentially multiply the right side by -1, more or less, you have to flip the sign within an inequality. That's just a property of the inequality, which is why the sign flips. But it is ultimately coming from the same source. Like I said, this is somewhat non-intuitive in many ways. If you think about it more, maybe it could be intuitive, but that's why I say try to avoid algebra with questions like this. If you see one on a math SAT or ACT problem, if you can, plug in values, test values, you'll save yourself a lot of confusion and time and heartache by doing it that way. What should I do the night of a test? So I have a very, well, not very unpopular, but a somewhat unpopular video on this on YouTube. Basically like the ultimate last minute tip. It's kind of a cheap shot, but I think it really is valuable and important answering this question. And for most students, you should not do anything the night before a test. You should be relaxing. You should be having fun, blowing off steam, getting your mind off the test, getting a good night's sleep in preparation for the test the next day. Way too many people spend way too much time the day before cramming, maybe staying up late, which is a disaster, and just getting themselves worked up and frazzled for not much benefit. I don't think last-minute studying, especially if you've put in the time previous to it, if you put in a month or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever, of studying, I think studying the night before can probably only do damage. It won't help or marginally help. And I think if anything, more likely it will do damage to your score. So the thing you should do is relax, have fun, get your mind off things, get good sleep, get fresh so that you're ready to go. Test day, ready to execute. No rust, or no, I should say, no fatigue, no burnout. Ready to go, ready to roll. That's what I would do the night before the test. For most people, the only exception is if you haven't studied at all and you literally are starting the day before. Well, then in that case, you have to do kind of a crash course. I would say do a practice test the day before. But even then, I mean, I just don't think that's going to help much. If you're, a day or two or a week before the test, there's very little you can do of material value. So even then, I think most people, it would just be better for you to rest and relax, not really cram or stress yourself out. But for most students, yeah, just relax. Don't stress yourself out. Okay, so waiting for more questions. The plan is to go till about 8:30, which is Eastern time. That's 22 minutes, no matter what time zone you're in. So if you have more questions, feel free to post them in chat. You can also send me an email, ask@reasonprep.com. All that stuff is good. Be happy to ask. Planning on having another live stream next week sometime, so pay attention to that. I announce live streams, updates, or live stream dates on YouTube and on Facebook group, our study group. If you haven't joined it, there's a Reason Preps Facebook group. Go to my website. You'll find a link there. I announce it in my email list, so if you're a member of my list, you'll get announcements of this as well. All that good stuff. So that's why I'll announce new live streams, new live stream times. There's also a page on my site where I talk about live stream times. The highlights, the recordings of this episode will be sent, will be posted right after this is done. The whole live stream will be up, but I'll post highlights probably tomorrow, cutting this up into the best moments, quote unquote, the highlights. So you can go back to this that way. There'll be timestamps so you can see what I talk about when. That'll be coming with the video tomorrow. What are good snacks in between tests? Hold on, let me just respond to this quickly. Okay, what are good snacks in between the tests? So yeah, you do get breaks and you do have a time for snacks. Anything healthy. I'm not a dietitian, not a nutritionist, but fruit is good. Anything with complex carbs, nothing sugary, right? Nothing like processed sugary, like candy bars or anything like that, because that'll send you out of whack. Maybe even, if possible, something with caffeine in it if you are a caffeine fiend, because caffeine can help with awareness and with alertness, I should say, and with focus. So, yeah, your energy level. So caffeine might be good a little bit if it's not going to make you jumpy. Otherwise, water, fruit, vegetables, complex carbs, anything like that is fine. You don't have to overthink it too much. Just no junk, no potato chips, no candy bars, things like that. Do the majority of colleges allow students to send their highest score, or do they see all scores? I don't know exact number. I think a good chunk of them are score choice, where you can send whatever. You don't have to send them all of your scores. But a good amount as well will want to see all of them. In the end, don't stress about this. It doesn't matter. Even if you have one really bad test score, if it really bothers you, you could attach a supplementary note to your application to explain, if there is a reason, why the score is low. But it doesn't matter. In the end, they want to look at your best work. What's your best score? They know people change, they get better, they improve. They, extenuating circumstances may make one score or a couple scores lower than the rest. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Just send whatever they want, whether it's all the scores or, if you can send particular scores through score choice, that's fine. Don't worry about it. It's totally not a thing. As long as you hit your target, or at least get, to a place where you're competitive with that school, a low score is not going to hurt you. It's not, I shouldn't say it's not going to hurt you, but it's not anything to worry about. It's just out of your control anyway. It doesn't matter. There's 1,000 other things that I think are much more critical when it comes to putting together the application that can make a difference, like your essay or how you package yourself to colleges, to the admissions committees. Is it a good idea to read the questions first on ACT Science and then looking at graphs and charts? Well, to some extent. So I talk about this a lot in the ACT Science Bootcamp and in my ACT videos on YouTube and elsewhere. I go to the questions first. I don't. So I would say this. Yes, you go to the questions first, but what you don't do is read through all the questions and then start reading the graphs aimlessly. That's pointless. Instead, as I talk about in the course, you pick a really specific question. Then you use that and you go back to the graphs and figures and find the answer to that question. And then once you've done that, you pick the next specific question. Go to the graphs and figures or text, whatever you need, find the information to answer that and move on, right? So it's very targeted work. You're reading a question, going back to the passage, finding the information you need to answer it, rinse and repeat. So you're not just going to be like reading all the questions and then going back and reading all the graphs and trying to, assemble something that makes sense. That's too aimless. That's too random. So instead you're going to focus on the questions. Let the questions tell you what's going to be important and what's not. And like I said, I talk about this a lot in my ACT Science Bootcamp course, among other places as well. Oh, what title is the vocabulary word? So here, let's just do this. So to find the vocabulary words, let me switch this over. Go to Google. Go to Reason Prep vocab list. Just Google it. And it's the first one. And it's right here. So, yeah. That's the best way. If you also go to my website, if you go to just reasonprep.com, and if you go to downloads, yeah, it's right here too. So it's also under downloads. A lot of ways to find it. You could also actually just go to my website. I have a search engine here. Just type in vocab, and then it'll pop up, and then boom. Very easy. Okay, so we'll get rid of that. I'm a rising senior. Could be a senior next year. I don't know what grade to put when I fill in the info when registering for the SAT. I don't actually know the specific answer to that. It probably doesn't really matter that much. I'm guessing you would put. Let's just say let's see what Mr. Google says, because I don't think it matters that much. What grade do I put on SAT? I don't know. Let's see what this is. So let's just see what they say in the student registration booklet. Grade. Yeah, it says current grade level. Fill in as directed on the registration form. So I don't know if there's a specific... Oh, wait, was that it? Let's try this. SAT registration current grade. Yeah, I'm not quite sure about this. I'd have to... Wait, let's see what this says. This is College Confidential. Yeah, it looks like it doesn't matter. Put whatever. It sounds like, from what I'm reading here, it's probably more of a marketing thing on their part that they can slice up data, blah, blah, blah. Look it up in Google if you're concerned. Just check. Maybe the registration form will tell you. It probably doesn't matter. Probably doesn't matter either way. What is my cancellation policy for tutoring? Basically, as long as you cancel within 24 hours or with 24 hours or less, it's not an issue. I know things come up. And so technically, if you don't cancel within 24 hours, like if it's a last minute cancellation, I do charge a nominal fee. I think it's $30. To be honest, I don't really enforce it that much because most people, I don't really have an issue with this. It would be an issue though if it was just a consistent thing. Like, things come up. Like I'm not gonna go nuts. I know sometimes car breaks down or you get slammed, an emergency, and I'm not gonna be crazy about it. It's really just in place so that if I have to enforce it, I will. But I honestly, in my entire business career, my entire time doing tutoring, I've never once had to charge a cancellation fee. So it's not a huge deal. I'm not super strict about it, as long as it's not abused. Like, just if we have a good relationship, this doesn't become much of an issue. I'm pretty forgiving, and because of that, most students are pretty respectful of my time. Yeah, so technically I do charge a fee if you cancel with less than 24 hours notice, but like I said, it's not really much of an issue most of the time. And the other thing as well is, so in terms of my tutoring, all the payments are made after the session. So it's not like, you pay for 10 sessions up front and then, if you don't come to certain sessions, I keep the money anyway. It doesn't work like that. So you're fully in control of your billing in some sense. You're fully in control of the payments. I send the invoices out after the session. So yeah, it's not really much of an issue. I'm not super strict about this. Follow-up question about this. And do I tutor via Skype? Yeah, Skype or Google Hangouts. And we do kind of like we're seeing here. So you can see my computer screen as we talk and as we go through stuff. And it's the same thing with Skype and Google Hangouts. I'm able to share my computer screen so we can, work on problems together, read passages together. It's a very visual thing. It's not just audio, because that would be impossible or very difficult to tutor over the phone. It wouldn't work well. So we have the audio, of course, but also the visual, so we can work through stuff together. You can see how the problems are solved. It works out pretty well. Reading is the first time and without questions, just the purpose of understanding or solving old tests. You always solve the test. You should never just read them for fun until you solve them. So definitely do the old essay. Oh, I guess it's an either or type thing. You should basically put it this way. You should always do the questions first, and then later you can read and reread them and make sure you understand them for extra practice. But always do them first. And I also do think it's an either or. Do both. So you're going to maybe review old or new SATs that you've done already, read the passages, and you're going to do old SAT tests. Do both. Mix it up so you get a good mix of the kinds of things you might have to do. I'm a freshman and I took ACT this year. Is it a good idea to take it next year or wait until junior and senior year to take it again? So one way to think about it is, if you're taking it as a sophomore, what would be why? What would be the reason for it? If it's to get more experience with a test, that's one thing. That might be valuable. If it's to try to finish it so you don't have to take it again, you have to question the realism of that. I mean, if you get a 36 as a sophomore, then you're done, of course. But let's say you got a 30 when you were a sophomore. Would that really prevent you from retaking it? Because maybe as a junior or a senior, maybe you can get a 34 or 35 or 36, right? So even if you got a high score as a sophomore, there's still a question of whether you would take it. Like, the only time where you would be done is if you had a 36 or a 35, right? Or 34 even in many cases. And the thing to remember is most students do their best work in the spring of their junior year or the fall of their senior year. And that's just a result of more time in school and that you're older. And age makes a big difference intellectually, mentally, emotionally at all your ages. The difference between a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old and a 16 and a 17 and a 17 and 18-year-old can be pretty profound. Whereas the difference between a 32-year-old like myself and a 33-year-old, not as much. So I would say no need to rush. Maybe if you want, you can take it again next year just to check in. But I would ultimately say there's no real need to rush. You could wait until junior year. Do like October junior year if you wanted to get started early, since you've already kind of gotten started, or maybe a winter junior year, kind of typical track. Yeah, I think that's probably better rather than trying to rush it or cram it. Unless like I said, if you scored on the ACT If you're already in the 30s, then yeah, maybe take it right away. But there's no need to rush it. I would wait until junior year in most cases. Okay, a few more minutes. I'll answer any other remaining questions there might be, and then we will wrap up for the day. Okay, question about ACT reading. How do you avoid running out of time on ACT reading? Do you tackle each passage to minimize time? How do you tackle each passage to minimize time spent per question? So this is basically a question about what's the overall strategy for ACT reading. And there's a lot of elements that go into this. My ACT reading course goes into extreme detail on this. I've got a lot of videos for free on YouTube. If you check my playlists, go to my ACT reading playlist. I've got a bunch of videos there that talk about time management and strategy. So I would start there. And if you want more, go to my ACT reading bootcamp. It's a complete full course on ACT reading. I guess the quickest answer I can give for this, I'll try to leave you with something so that I'm not completely punting to videos, because it's a complex issue. There's a lot of pieces that go into this in terms of passage order, question order, overall strategy, how you evaluate questions, how you evaluate choices, questions that you skip, questions that you don't skip, how much you should skip them, when you should guess. There's a lot that goes into this, so it's hard to give just one quick soundbite answer. The main thing I would say is, for most students, running out of time is not the reason why you're getting the score you're getting. You're getting the score you're getting because you're making mistakes on questions that you should be getting right, or that for whatever reason you're making a strategy mistake, an approach mistake, misreading, whatever it might be, you're getting those wrong. For most students, the time is not, in some sense it's the issue, but it's not the reason why you're, like, for example, if a student is getting, I'm not saying you are, whoever asked this question, I'm just saying in general, if someone's getting a 22 on reading, and they ask me, well, how do I finish? I can say right off the bat, you're focusing on the wrong thing. The reason why you're getting a 22 or 23 or 24 or 25 is not because you're running out of time. That's not the issue. You can get for example, a 27 if you just do 3 passages and you do them really well and you guess pretty well on the 4th passage. You can get a 27. So it has nothing to do with finishing the test in that way. Now, if you're going for a 30 score, then yeah, finishing matters. So I would say, just as a first answer to this, is for many people, at least at first, the issue is not really about finishing. It's about being more efficient. So when you say, how do you tackle each passage to minimize time spent per question? I think what we need to keep in mind is that every question type is not going to require the same amount of time. There are some questions that are going to be relatively quick to solve, and we want to make sure we can get those done because those are generally easy. There are going to be other questions that are going to take longer to solve, and we want to make sure to leave them until the end. And this is where we get into issues of strategy. So we're not going to be spending the same amount of time on every question. We're not going to put the same amount of effort in every question. We're not going to do the questions in order. That's another thing, just as a general tip. If you're doing the questions in order, from 1 to 40 on ACT reading, just 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4, you're almost guaranteed being inefficient. You're almost guaranteed not doing the test in the best approach. And again, I talk about this a lot in my videos. So it's little things like that. But again, for now, don't worry so much about time. Once you can get to, 27, 28, then maybe time starts to matter more. But until then, it's not going to be, I think, for most students, the main concern. I saw your reading book list, and I'm cherry picking some books from over there. Do I read books normally for fun, or should I follow some steps? So I wouldn't do anything too crazy about this. I wouldn't make it too formal. I would just read for fun. How you're going to really absorb the lessons and how you're really going to kind of learn to read is to read something you enjoy, something you can get engrossed in and really engage with. That is what's going to help you build those skills, because the more attention you're paying to something, the more invested you get in it, naturally the more you're going to absorb. What we don't want to turn this into, kind of maybe getting to the gist of your question, we don't really want to turn this into kind of an English class activity. You probably do enough formal structured reading with, analyses and papers and questions and assignments. You probably do that enough to some extent in English. So I wouldn't make this activity that. I would make this activity learning to love reading, learning to gain knowledge, get interested in something, learning to engage with interesting ideas. I would say one thing to do is when you're picking out stuff to read a lot of different types of things. So read stuff that you're naturally interested in, but also try to push in different directions. Try to read stuff that's maybe a little bit harder than you would want to read, or something that maybe you're not as interested in, but you think might be important to develop you as a reader. So I would say it's more in the selection of what you read rather than something you would do. I don't think there's any specific books. I think you should just enjoy it, have fun, find the pleasure in reading, and it'll take care of itself, especially in the long term, right? I mean, for example, when I was growing up, I did a lot of reading, and I read because I enjoyed it and because I like to read and learn a lot, and I was curious, and that helped me become a better reader. And I didn't do, structured activities or anything like that. Nothing wrong with that, but it's about developing that sense and that natural love and interest in reading. That's going to be so much more important than, checking boxes off of a checklist or anything like that. Just enjoy it when you're doing this kind of outside reading, for sure. Okay, I think that's where we're going to wrap it up for today. So, as I said, this highlights for this session will be up on YouTube tomorrow. The full stream will be up pretty much right when I end the stream today. We'll be having another stream next week. Pay attention to my YouTube channel, to my website, to my Facebook group, or be on my email list. Just go to my live stream page. You can join my email list for live streams, and you'll get an update on when I'm having the next streams. Again, probably one sometime next week. Now that we're getting into the school year being over for most people, I'm going to do better times than just evening Eastern time times. I'm going to vary it quite a bit. So pay attention. I'm going to have more of these as we get deeper into the summer and get into the full study season for these tests, especially for you rising seniors out there. So thanks so much for watching. Look forward to see you all at the next one, and good luck studying. So I will see you next time.